The conversations recently have shifted. So the conversations that I am now having with CEOs and nonprofit leaders and industry leaders and diversity officers and all of you, many of you who are on today's webinar, has shifted to where do we go from here? How do we create lasting change? How do we make sure that flexibility is not seen as a stopgap measure during the pandemic, but to be seen as something whose idea has come and whose ideas will continue within our organizations? And I'm often asked, is it too soon? Is it too soon to be having these conversations? Perhaps we should wait. And the answer is it's not too soon. And in some cases, it's even a little bit late. But in your organizations, we need to make sure that you are having those conversations, that you are creating the focus groups, the task force that are held responsible for looking at the future of work. We know this time will end. We know there will be a time when our offices can reopen safely, and we need to be prepared for that time. And we need to put together the kinds of infrastructure, the support that you need in order for the flexibility to thrive. And it would be a mistake to go back to the status quo. I know I talk to many leaders who are often lamenting, when will we go back to normal? The reality is there are lots of parts of normal and the status quo that are not worth returning to. And we need to think about, how do we move forward? How do we leverage the lessons that we have learned? I want to make sure I give all of you some concrete takeaways and a framework to be thinking about as you have those conversations within your organizations. And so this framework that I'm going to talk about is one that we have used in our conversations, in the focus groups that we have been holding, at the partner retreats that we have been talking at, where we're focusing on what does that future of work look like. The first thing you want to think about is, how does your organization engage with flexibility? How do you want to be thinking about flexibility? How are you talking about flexibility? Is it a policy? Is it going to be a framework? Is it going to go beyond that? Because context matters, and that's the first thing you want to start to think about. How are your organizations engaging with it? The second E is around experience. How do your employees experience flexibility within your organizations? How do you want them to experience flexibility? How do you want them to talk about? Will I see a gap if I talk to your employees about the ways that they experience flexibility and the ways that you intended for them to experience flexibility? It's really important that we think about that and how we're going to hold people accountable for the kinds of flexibilities that will ultimately really leverage top talent and be the business imperative and allow you to see the business benefits that you can when you create a flexible work environment. The third E you want to look at is your environment. Do you have the right kind of infrastructure to support the kinds of flexibility that you need? It will not survive without the infrastructure to support it. Are you making the right investments in training? Are you making the right investments in the technology that you need, or the ways in which you set up your real estate? Are you creating offices where people have an opportunity to come together, to collaborate, and be able to leverage flexibility for the times when they are working remotely, perhaps? So you need to be thinking about creating that right environment. And the fourth E you want to be thinking about in these task force is the effectiveness. Are you creating the kind of organization that measures the effectiveness, not only measures it, but you actually track it as well, to be able to analyze how are you effectively working when it comes to flexibility? Are there things that need to be adjusted? Are there things that need to be changed? So those are the 4 E's that you really want to be thinking about when you are forming these task force. And something that's important as you form these task force is it's really important that somebody who leads the diversity efforts at your organizations have a seat at that table. Diversity and inclusion is not an afterthought after you've created your initiative and created your strategy to come in and just look over it. They should be at the table as it's forming. And inclusion is an important part of flexibility, making sure that you create the future of work with inclusion at its center.